Appreciate you being part of Birds 365 here on the JAKIB Media YouTube channel. John McMullen and Jody McDonald hanging with you. All right, it is a Thursday. Good to have Mike Gill on. A day late, but just as good, just the same. Still rocking the WVU. I give him points for loyalty, but not for handicapping because they're just not very good. But the Eagles are good, even though there is some panic in the
street. A lot of panic, evidently. A lot of panic, Jody.
I don't know if I'd go a lot, but enough and more than there should be. I think we can all agree on that because they lost to the Dallas Cowboys with their backup quarterback. What is your panic level, Mike Gill?
4.
Wow. I'm surprised it's that high, Mike.
Well, I mean, there are some
injuries. And in the injuries. The injuries are the part of what it gets it to 4.
Right. There are some injury issues that I guess have to be thought about. You know, Lane Johnson's thing. I mean, he may play, but how long can he handle playing in a game before he's in and out, in and out, in and out? I think Maddox is a problem, right? I mean, how are they going to kind of figure out what to do with that spot? That's an underrated problem. And then like Chauncey Gardner, he's not going to get the practice window open, which means he's not going to play again, which means when he does play, he will have missed 6-7 straight weeks. And now you're just saying, hey, get back out there and be a playmaker, start making interceptions. So I'm not concerned that they lost the game to Dallas. You know, I said, I don't care, whatever. They lost to Dallas. Dallas couldn't stop them. I think if they play in a game and much like the Washington game, if they're going to turn the ball over 4 times, they'll lose to Houston, let alone Dallas. I mean, so they can't do that. But the injuries thing is more my concern, not the way they lost that game the other day.
Now, I should have hyper-focused it. I'm with you. The injuries are far more of a worry than losing to Dallas. The panic scale, I guess I'll for the number 1 seed in the NFC East, what is the panic scale for Mike Gill? Because that's where I'm really low. I'm not.
Yeah, I would be low. Look, this Saints team, although they are playing for something, I mean, they still have a possibility of winning that division. Yeah. So that the narrative has changed on them from, hey, we're going to have a top 5 draft pick to this team's coming in with a chance to make the playoffs all of a sudden. The problem is they have a chance to make the playoffs in a really bad division with a really bad team. That offense is just not good. And I think where the Eagles should have, I know everybody's panicking about the defense last week. I don't know. Let me ask you guys, and I know this is kind of contrarian, but is there a part of you that says John Gannon says, I'm not showing you guys anything. I'm not switching. I'm not adjusting. This is what you're getting this week. And if we get into a shootout game, great. If not, I'm not giving you anything in this game because I know I'm going to see you in a couple of weeks.
After giving up a 40 spot? No, I don't think there's any part of Jonathan Gannon that does that.
No, he meant coming into the game.
Yes.
Against the Cowboys.
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about for this game against the Saints.
No.
Because he's seeing the Cowboys. He'll probably see the Cowboys for a 3rd time. So correct. I think Mike is saying, did he hold stuff back because he thinks he's going to see the Cowboys for a 3rd time? I don't think so.
No. And like this week against this Saints team, you could call the same defensive game. They just don't have anything. I mean, the quarterback play is very subpar. Olave was having a great year for them. He's probably out. They just have very lack of weapons. So I wouldn't be all that concerned with this Saints roster. I mean, anybody can beat you. They can come in there. They need to win the game to make the playoffs. But my level of concern, John, to go back to your question, would be pretty low. And I think the Giants will likely be in by next week, right? If they win this week. So that game could really have
That's amazing, by the way. Brian Daboll, great job with that team. Great job with the New York Giants. And Carson Wentz trying to get the Washington Commanders into the playoffs. Very interesting final 2 weeks of the season. It starts tonight, Mike, though. And one of the other not great things about the end of the season, certain teams make business decisions. Tennessee, no matter what they do tonight, is going to play for that conference's bad division's title in Week 18 against Jacksonville. So it doesn't matter. They're not going to play anybody. And Dallas is playing in Tennessee. Now, in theory, that might be a tough game for Dallas. But now it's probably going to be a cakewalk. And so, does that up it a little bit? Because Dallas is probably going to win. So you're not going to backdoor into it, at least until Sunday. Minnesota's not playing until 4:25. Eagles play at 1. So they're not going to know if Minnesota wins or loses. So the Eagles are pretty much going to have to play the game to win.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I know Doug Peterson said the other day, every game you play to win.
Yeah, right? I was laughing about that.
They're going to play their starters, I guess, Jacksonville, because that game means nothing. But yeah, I mean, I think the Eagles are need to play to win. Like, you've got to continue. The big problem they've had is this balance of they were so far ahead, and that what do you do if you clinched last week against Dallas? If you sit your guys against the Saints and the Giants, and you have a bye? I mean, so you've got to still play these games. So on the surface, it's kind of a good thing that you still need to kind of keep your foot on the gas here. I think at least a little bit, instead of trying to dance around. Kind of unprecedented, right? Who has clinched with 2 weeks, with 2 weeks still left in the season and had a bye? I don't know that I've ever remembered a situation where that has occurred, where a team has then had to figure out how to kind of handle that. So you just take care of your business. Tonight, you're right, John. If Derrick Henry's playing and this Titans team is at full strength, they're the kind of style that could give you a problem because they can run the ball, and we know Dallas doesn't stop the run all that well. And then, of course, Dallas is famously 40-3 against Minnesota, and then looks like crap 2 weeks later. So they're flying high off of kind of what I think is a not all that significant win over Philadelphia. And then they show up tonight and look like Dallas did against Houston or Jacksonville.
A couple things. Number one, you're right about the Titans because they can run the ball. They might give a given opponent a tough time. Except they haven't for 5 straight weeks. They've lost 5 straight games. So the whole theory behind it is not holding.
I thought they were going to give the Eagles a problem. I was wrong. Same exact thing.
Same exact setup, and the Eagles did what they did to the Titans. So with Malik Willis at the helm, if they were going all out, I don't think they can win tonight's game.
Well, and one problem for them, too, is their pass defense is atrocious. And I think what Dallas kind of displayed last week, I give Kellen Moore a lot of credit. To me, Kellen Moore is kind of the key for that team, is what kind of game is he going to call? There's been games with Cooper Rush early in the year. I thought he did a really good job. And then Dak came back and he kind of got away from it. I thought last week they did a good job of moving Lamb around and, of course, getting him kind of situated against Josiah Scott way too much. Linebackers got involved. I don't know. Teams seemingly are figuring out ways to try to get the Eagles linebackers more into coverage here.
By the way, Eagles fans are going to hate this. And people, I think a lot of people don't realize it because they don't like Mike McCarthy. The Cowboys have a good coaching staff. I mean, a really good coaching staff. Dan Quinn, I always joke, he's like the defensive version of Norv Turner. It's illegal to criticize him. He's just so well respected in this league. And Kellen Moore is one of those guys who is really inventive. And I was talking to Bradbury yesterday, James Bradbury, who is one of the, I say it all the time, one of the savviest cornerbacks I've ever seen. The Eagles have been doing this to people all year. So the Eagles have a very good coaching staff. They play tempo, so you can't sub, and they get you in a position where they have the personnel you want. Bradbury told me that's what the Cowboys were doing. When the Eagles were playing their 5-man fronts, the Cowboys would go tempo because they didn't want them to sub into their pass coverage. They did it on the 3rd and 30 play. They went tempo. Who does that?
Yeah.
And the Eagles weren't ready. They weren't prepared. They didn't have the group they wanted on the field. Bradbury said they communicated it well, but they weren't prepared for the quick snap. And all of a sudden, Josiah Scott's supposed to race back, and he couldn't get to his landmark quickly enough. They have a really, really good coaching staff.
I would agree. And I would also say they have a very good coaching staff, but in the losses they've had, that has what reared its ugly head is McCarthy's mismanagement sometimes. I mean, he's for the most part, he has gotten out of the way. I've gone out of my way to say that on the show is, in the Garrett years, they had the best rosters. He was a buffoon. McCarthy, they've had the best roster. The problem
call him Coach Garrett, though, Mike.
Sure.
Coach Garrett.
Last year, they had the best roster. They mismanaged the game. The losses they have this year against Green Bay and Jacksonville, those games in the end of the game were mismanaged by the head coach, not the coordinators as much, but the head coach.
I would argue the game last year was mismanaged by the quarterback.
You sounded like one of my callers on WIP.
Quarterback.
When the team wins, it's the coordinators. When the team loses, it's the head coach. It's the same group of guys every single week. So how do you differentiate? How do you come up with when they win, it's because they got really good coordinators. But when they lose, it's because the head coach is a screw up.
Yeah,
That's just not fair.
Mike McCarthy's a good coach.
I'm saying they have their staff. I'm agreeing with John that their staff has, I don't know, like last year was their window. And then when they lost Cooper, Amari Cooper.
Guess I'll try and re-ask the question. How did these great coordinators screw up? How did they get a pass for the Cowboys' lousy losses? Where were they? Did they not show? Did they not?
Kellen Moore, I think, has a big role in the Jacksonville game. The way he called that when they were up 17, the way he called that game. But again, that's the staff. I'm saying as a whole, and Mike McCarthy is the head coach of the team. So you wonder in a big game. Is that going to be I think the reason they lose is more because of mismanagement, more so than they are not the better team on the field.
What I will say, first of all, everybody makes mistakes. I mean, we saw
absolutely
Reed, who's a Hall of Fame coach. So when you say somebody's a good coach, that doesn't mean they don't make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. You go back to their playoff loss last year. That's on Dak Prescott. I'm quite sure. The Cowboys make them understand, look, the official has to place the ball. So you have to be self-aware at that point. And by the way, they still got to win the game. I mean, people say they would have won the game. They would have had one desperation heave into the end zone.
Right.
They're not necessarily winning or tying the game. But the quarterback is taught that, understands that he's played enough football where he realizes, hey, I can't spot the ball. The official has to spot the ball. He's got to know that. I can't blame that on Mike McCarthy. I think it's interesting, and we'll get back to the Eagles because we're not Cowboys 365. But, everybody's like Sean Payton, Dallas. Damn good coaching staff. I don't know if I want to upset the whole thing. Just to bring in one guy because everybody thinks he's the guy. But we'll have plenty of time to talk about that in the offseason.
I also think, John and Jody, we all take for granted that the guy who's the head coach, he just is the best at everything. Like some of these guys, they're really good at calling plays or they're really good at pace of the game and they're really good at down and distance. You might be good at 9 things, but time management, I don't know why everyone just assumes you're going to be great at all these things. Like sometimes in some games, things are happening and you miscalculate or you don't I don't know why a team doesn't have a guy who is just some sort of math savant that understands clock stuff. And he literally stands right next to him or in the booth at all times, because there are times where that is what ends up being the downfall in a game that you may have had a great game all the way up to that point, and that one flaw you have stands out.
Well, people keep talking about Andy with that here. I mean,
exactly.
It's and most teams do have a time management guy, a game management guy that helps, that's in your ear. But man, they banned us. But they used to allow us to go on the field, basically with 4 minutes left. Now everything has changed. But man, when you're on the sidelines in an NFL game, people do not realize how quick this stuff moves, man. I mean, it moves just incredibly fast. And it's a lot easier to sit in the press box or sit at home in front of the television and say, you should have done this, you should have done that. Those decisions are coming up quickly. And that's what I love about Nick Sirianni, who realized very quickly as a rookie head coach, this job is big. This job is big. I can't be bogged down worrying about play calls if I want to coach this whole team. I talk to Jody about that all the time. I love that philosophy. And I think Mike McCarthy has become a better coach because he's not the play caller anymore.
And I'll give you another reason why there isn't that individual right by his side to tell him. As John just said, they're becoming more and more CEO, head coach in the NFL. So they're not calling plays on the offensive side, not calling plays. What the hell else does the coach do? Is he a cheerleader? If you're the head coach and you're not managing the clock and you're not substituting and you're not calling the plays, why the hell are you making $8 million? Come on, you got to be in charge of something. And I will tell you, these head coaches want that responsibility. They take on that responsibility. Now, some of them, like Andy Reid, just refuse to give up the play calling responsibility. That's what they see as their best skill and their most important duty. So they hold on to that. Others have, and John, in my opinion, wisely given that up because it's something that can be better coordinated if you've got other people doing it. But the coaches don't want to give that up. They want to be on the hook for that. They want to get credit for when they play it right. They'll take the grief when they get it wrong.
Yeah, there's definitely ego involved with play callers. And, Doug would admit it. I mean, that was the funnest part of the game for him. So he wanted to do it.
Well, isn't that, though, the reason why generally they get hired is because of their
and
play calling acumen.
Thing. Yeah.
And that's why I find the flaw. You could look at a guy like Josh McDaniels, who might be a great play caller and a coordinator, but obviously there's a flaw somewhere when he makes it to that next level. And I find that these owners who are doing the hiring cannot see past the fact that some guys are very good at calling plays, but they're not good at, Jody, doing the other things that you're looking for, clapping hands, keeping the morale up, keeping 53 men all together at all times, having the tough conversations. People forget there's a lot of time spent in that building before Sunday happens. That's where the head coach really makes his mark more so than calling plays on Sunday, which he can pawn off to somebody else. But that's the reason why these guys are getting these high profile jobs, is because they're perceived to be very good at that part of their game. And then they get to the bright lights. And as John mentioned, well, now everything's happening so fast and you're making decisions for both sides of the ball, plus the special teams. And there's a fight on the sideline. Somebody threw the iPad. This guy's doing that. And you've got to be engaged in all of it.
Yeah. And, there's not a better play caller, and Jody knows my thought process on this. There's not a better play caller, better schemer in the world. I'll use Nick Sirianni's terminology, better than Kyle Shanahan. I love Kyle Shanahan, but boy, he makes a lot of game management mistakes. And why? Because he's bogged down in the play calling and scheming. Now, there's a give and take. I'm not going to fire the guy because he's so good at this, but there's a give and take to it. And if you're, I see it, with Sean McVay as well, and now Kevin O'Connell, they get bogged down and mistakes are made. And Andy's the best example of all, probably, because that's a Hall of Fame coach. No doubt about it. Hall of Fame coach. When you're bogged down with that, there's going to be some time management issues, and it's going to be
interestingly enough, I don't know, maybe you guys can, at the top of your head, think about this, but one area where I don't remember, and of course the Eagles are 13-2 right now, so you don't get a lot of angry reaction, but is that Nick Sirianni and his staff have not mismanaged the clock all that much, where it has reared.
You know what? People were complaining that Gardner Minshew shouldn't have spiked the ball.
Yeah, that was.
You still get stuff like that. Now, then the debate happens. How many plays are you going to get in that amount of time? So it's not perfect, but I think it's worked. It certainly worked for Nick Sirianni being a CEO coach. I will say that. And you're right about during the week, Mike. Far more work goes in during the week when it comes to game planning, play calling, than people realize. I mean, that sheet's there for a reason.
And the most fun thing about second guessing coaches and or a quarterback, because you're right. The only question that came up after the game this Sunday was, should Minshew have spiked the ball there? If he throws a touchdown pass, does anybody mention, I really thought it was actually a mistake to spike the ball? Of course not. So the only thing that matters is the defining it after the fact. If it doesn't work out for the home team, if they can't get well, then how the hell did you spike the ball? It only becomes a debate if the ensuing plays don't work out.
We're getting esoteric. I say all the time, people don't judge play calling; they judge play results. They just don't realize.
Absolutely right.
Because you could say, "Oh, that's a bad play." Why is it a bad play? Did the left guard miss a block? Did the right guard miss a block? Was the receiver open? So many things can go wrong on a play, and you say, I had this discussion with Doug Peterson. He's like, yeah, sometimes players bail you out, and sometimes you got the best play call ever imagined, and you see it working and miss block, and it blows up. Nobody judges play calling. They judge play results, but they don't realize it.
Yeah. And look, I think for the most part, that's where, when we get to the playoff situation, I mean, these next couple of weeks, you're seeing teams that are coaching games with much different mindsets than they were 10 weeks ago, right? Hey, I want to take a look at this kid. I need to get more look at that. I want to see this. So I'm going to call plays this way. Can this right tackle handle pass block 4 down? Stuff like that gets into play at this stage of the season, which really changes things. That all changes in a couple of weeks where there is no, hey, I want to look at this guy. My game plan is to win this game in front of me. And that is where, look, a lot of these teams, I think over the years we see is who's better prepared, because the level of talent is very similar.
Let me run these numbers by both you two guys. Since 2016, 59, 29, and 1 games the Eagle played with Lane Johnson as their starting right tackle. Games without Lane Johnson, 9 and 21. That's significantly above 500. It's compared to well below 500. How are they going to win without Lane Johnson?
Yeah, that number has been out there for a while. No, the 1 year they were just a bad football team. That was 2020, I guess it was. They were just horrendous. They lost 5 guys on the offensive line. And I think the other year that might have been the year that he got drafted. Was the year before when they were really bad. And they had a lot of injuries on the offensive line. So then they drafted him. And then I guess he has been hurt. He played 9 games, 8 games somewhere in there. Look, he's important. There's no question about it. I don't know with this team it will stand out as much. It shouldn't, as some of the teams that he has been on in the past that it has stood out. I mean, obviously, that 2020 team was just horrendous, and they lost, what were they, 3-13 that year. So that's a big chunk of the reason why they were so bad. They've got some options. I'm interested, guys, to see what they do. I mean, is Driscoll definitively going to play that spot? I know they don't like to move one guy from one side to the other and go Mailata and play Dillard at left. I mean, obviously, they don't want to say anything yet, but what is your – because – quite frankly,
I asked Nick the question yesterday, and he was very he was having fun yesterday. He said, "I'm not going to answer that question because if I answer that question, the Saints are going to know." So he's in full competitive advantage mode.
Yeah,
I think Jack Driscoll is going to be the right tackle.
I thought it was amazing. Lane Johnson didn't give up a pressure or anything in however many straight. Driscoll's in for 1 game, 11 snaps. He gave up 1 pressure.
Yeah. Well, Lane's
there's a drop off. I mean, there's no question.
There's a significant drop off. I think it becomes a bigger question if Lane wasn't coming back. I think that might change the thinking. Then they might start thinking about, well, are we better with Dillard at left tackle, Mailata at right tackle?
Yeah.
But for 2 games and
one of them being the Saints, I think that Driscoll is a solid enough player. I mean, is it a drop-off? Absolutely. I think some of the games, Jody, where you mentioned the record, the drop-off was a pretty significant drop-off. Driscoll going into that spot, you've got a guy that, I mean, you could make an argument that would be starting on a lot of teams in this league. He wouldn't be a Pro Bowler, but would be a guy that would be Dennis Kelly, who was here years ago, he has been starting in this league for quite some time. Look at
Matt Pryor, baby.
Matt Pryor.
Got a mint from Detroit.
Right. So,
Stoutland University, man. You can
I
pay
think
back your student loans quickly.
I think for 2 games, they should be able to handle themselves over there with either configuration. I don't know. I kind of like Mailata and Dillard playing rather than Driscoll, because then you have Driscoll who can kind of still be that.
Here's the thought process, because I've talked a lot to Stoutland about this, and he doesn't like moving parts. So Mailata is better, obviously, at right tackle than any other option they would have, but he's not as good as Lane. So you're still getting worse at right tackle, but you're also getting worse at left tackle. Right. So you're affecting 2 positions. That's how he looks at it. So I would be, to be honest, if Lane was out for the season, I think it would still be Driscoll. But I think it would be more of a conversation. Maybe Nick pushes a little bit more. But if we're up to Stout, man, he doesn't want to affect 2 positions.
And if you handicap what the Eagles have done while Stoutland has been the offensive coordinator, they seem more open-minded to moving a guy from inside to outside or outside to inside, as long as he stays on the same side of the ball, as much as they are moving one guy from one side to the other. That Stoutland believes left side, right side is a big differential. If you're on one side of the line, you're playing with one hand, you're looking at the same kind of angles, that he's more willing to move a guy from tackle to guard and guard to tackle than he is left to right.
Now, Driscoll did move to left tackle this year when Dillard was hurt and Jordan had to come out. So
because they had no other choice.
Yeah. And he did okay. I was a little surprised. I was a little surprised by that. It's and Jordan, by the way, gave Driscoll a really good compliment, at least if you understand the Eagles locker room. And he called him Sayamalowish, because the Eagles think Isaac can play anywhere. They don't worry about Isaac. I mean, they don't worry. They think he can play every position, literally every position. And Driscoll has started to develop that versatility. So it'll be interesting. And it'll be more interesting at the playoffs, because I think my bigger concern with Lane is not, is he going to play? He's going to play. Is he going to finish? Because that's painful.
Yeah. That would be that I would be down the same road is, okay, Lane Johnson's playing, and then how long through the game before he has to come back? He missed parts of the Giant game.
Yeah.
Situation. Now, after that game, if memory serves, he did say he could have gone back in if they needed him.
Yeah.
And they didn't need him, so he did not go back. And now here we are a couple of weeks later with the same injury, but more serious. And now he's going to rest for a couple of weeks. He'll have 3 weeks really to rest that injury. So we'll see. But I agree with you, John, that would be my biggest concern. And now, look, knowing that, you can really ramp up whatever you want Driscoll to do to be prepared. If you want to say, hey, we want to get you a little bit more reps to get you prepared in the event that we need you to go into a game now, because there's a good possibility that happens. I think, put it this way, I think they're more equipped now to handle him being out than they are Maddox, right?
Avante's really, Avante's really good. Now, I think if CJ is back, that helps a lot, but he's not back right now. I think the eye is on the playoffs now with CJ Gardner-Johnson, because he can play slot and safety.
Now, you're going to ask him to move to the slot after not playing there all season? I mean, is that crazy? Well,
he's played it his whole NFL career. I think
right.
In a lot of ways, he's probably more comfortable there. I do think it was interesting. They were really cooking with Avonte Maddox at the end there. Unfortunately, it really only started in the Chicago game, and I thought it was injury related, but evidently it wasn't, because they did the same thing in the Dallas game. They started playing him at safety when they played base, which is not often, but still, and then moved him into the slot when they needed in nickel corner when they're playing, which is most of the time. And what that did is kept him on the field for every play, because typically he would leave the field if they were playing base. And that enabled them to get him on the field for the entire game. I think they might do the same thing with CJ when he comes back, and I think that would be really, really helpful. But there's so much uncertainty with that lacerated kidney.
You know what it is, Jody? You know what it is, Jody? You can't trust a guy from Pitt.
Oh, going down that foolish West Virginia road again. All right. One last question for both you guys, and certainly not the sample size that I gave you on Lane Johnson. 59, 29, and 1 with him, 9 and 21 without him. Gardner Minshew's career record against the Eagles. Gardner Minshew. Andy Dalton's career record against the Eagles. Either one of you know?
I have not delved into it.
I mean, they played the Bengals maybe twice in his time frame, and then he was with Dallas.
Yeah, he's with Dallas. Who else was he with? Boy, he started to bounce around. I don't know.
How does undefeated sound?
Yeah. How many? 3-0?
3-0.
Yeah.
Well, I got the numbers right. 2 with Cincinnati.
You did exactly right. Good computing by you, Gill. 3-0, including a victory over the Jalen Hurts-led Eagles in 2020. You forget that game at the end of the year when they were both mathematically still involved in the playoff. The god-awful NFC East. And he came in and put up good numbers against this Eagle defense in 2020.
Nick Sirianni was asked your Lane Johnson question essentially yesterday, Jody, about the difference between when he's on the field, when he's off the field. And he said, and to his credit, he said this before, what does that have to do with me? I wasn't here. What does Andy Dalton beating the Eagles in 2020 have to do with this team?
Well,
I agree. But what does Andy Dalton beating him in 2016 with the Bengals have to do with this team? Yeah. I get it, but 3-0 is 3-0. It's mindset. It's a confident, cocky red rifle coming to town, knowing he's undefeated against the Philadelphia Eagles.
There was a time where Dalton was a competent, he was. Well, I don't know. I mean, with those Bengals teams, people forget they were winning 10 games, making that they were Super Bowl talk with that team for a couple of those years that he was there. Now, he is not nearly the same player that he was in those Cincinnati days. The Dallas game a couple of years ago, the Eagles obviously were not ready or anywhere near the level that they are now. I will say this, having a veteran quarterback in there, you still have to be somewhat concerned that he can have a game as opposed to, I heard you make a reference to Ian Book. I mean, you're not playing someone of that level. You're playing a capable veteran quarterback who, by the way, needs to win this game.
There's a lot of Ian Book disrespect going on here. A lot of Ian Book disrespect. This is a revenge game for Ian Book.
But who cares about Andy Dalton and what he did against the Eagles 2 years ago? Ian Book is one good hit from holding the Eagles' playoff hopes in his hands. You go ahead and dismiss the whole Ian
By
Book.
the way, Nick Sirianni, he first brought it up, Arizona. Somebody told him the Eagles had not won in Arizona since 2001. And he said the same thing. What the hell does that have to do with me? And they won. They didn't play well, but they won.
I think obviously the big question, for regardless of who the quarterback is with the Eagles every week, is what's the offensive line look like in New Orleans? Because the Eagles, 61 sacks. They need one more to set a franchise record. And when they win that battle up front, especially with a quarterback like Andy Dalton and the lack of weapons they have, that's where this game will be decided.
Ryan Ramczyk,
4 sacks last week. How'd that work out for the Eagles?
6,
Eagles.
Didn't they? They had
6.
Yeah.
6 sacks last week.
Well,
hold on, let me double check the final score. Oh, that's right. Dallas 40, Eagles 33.
By the way, Jonathan Gannon, 6 sacks for the Eagles, 0 for the Cowboys. In good times and bad, Jonathan Gannon says the same thing. Sacks are not a winning stat. Doesn't care.
He's just so wrong. That was the case this past week. But all right, you play Gannon, McMullen. Who leads the NFL in sacks?
Eagles.
Who's the only 13-2 team in football?
Eagles.
There's no fucking correlation, Gannon. Yeah, right. Stop.
That's not what he said. He said it's not a winning stat. He said,
except it is with the Eagles. They're winning. They're 13-2, and they're number one in the league.
Yeah, but all right, Jody, you're boiling a 13-2 record down to sacks when they had an MVP candidate at quarterback. They have one of the best offenses in football. They have one of the best defenses in football, one of the best secondaries when they communicate, which they didn't do in Dallas. And you're boiling it down to sacks, turnovers, and explosive plays. That's what Nick said. Forget about Jonathan Gannon. That's what Nick Sirianni cares about. That's what their analytics tell them correlate to winning. Everything else is just white noise. Turnovers. And by the way, Dallas, it wasn't about not getting sacks. The sacks were good. Why did they lose the game in Dallas? 4 stinking turnovers. That's why they lost the game in Dallas.
Right, to which I would say if you sack Andy Dalton 6 times, I would imagine the result would be a fumble and 2 interceptions also coming with it. Not the case with Dallas last week. You got to give Prescott and them a lot of credit. He picked them apart. He was flawless. He didn't make that bonehead mistake that has reared its ugly head into their losses this year. And I thought they had a really good game plan. I don't know that the Saints have the same personnel to get that done.
I'll go with seasonal stats over last week's results when it comes to sacks. So sorry, JG, you're never going to win me over on that one. What's the downside to a sack? There is none, 0. So
he didn't say there was, Jody. You're making jumps.
John. I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking to you or to Jonathan or anybody else. There's no downside to a sack.
Of course, there's no downside.
Excuse me?
Of course there's no downside.
Right. So I'm responding to the statement you made. Jonathan Gannon said it's not a winning stat. I'm going to point to the Eagles at 13-2 as proving it is in part, not the only thing. The Eagles aren't 13-2 solely because they lead the league in sacks, but I would say that's a big contributing factor, which is the reason why I just disagree with Gannon if he says it's not a winning stat. Sorry, I disagree with you, Gannon.
What I respect, he says it in good times and bad. In other words, he doesn't sit and cow and say, hey, we lead the league in sacks. He said it in bad times. He says it in good times. He's right in the fact that sacks are sort of like turnovers in the randomness category. It comes down to who's the quarterback. Is he going to give you an opportunity to get sacks? Do you have finishers? They got Hassan Reddick. They got pressure last year, but they didn't have finishers.
You know who number 2 is in sacks this year?
Dallas?
Probably still Dallas.
New England.
Did New England move in a second? Because Dallas was
50. Then Dallas.
Matt Judon's having a big year sack-wise.
Indianapolis has a lot of sacks this year. They're in the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're 6th in the league in sacks. Philadelphia, New England, Dallas, Kansas City, Baltimore, Indianapolis, San Francisco, Tampa Bay, and then your Jets. And then the Saints come marching in with 40 sacks.
Saints aren't bad.
What just generally speaking, what category did the Eagles lead the league in? Other than sacks?
Well, they did in turnovers until this game.
No, I'm talking about right now.
Now I would have their first in a lot of their first in passing defense. They're first in a lot of stuff, but I'd have to look it up.
Yeah, I would say sacks is part of the reason why they're 13-2. Pretty good chunk. And yeah, I'd call it a winning stat. Sorry, I disagree with the coordinator. Mike Gill, thank you very much. Appreciate you jumping in with us today. We'll certainly slot you back in again next week. We'll work on the day. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We'll get you in one of these days. But
I figured there was going to be
you got to lose the West Virginia garb. All right, it just doesn't work.
There was no player of the week this week, so I didn't.
That's right, Gil. It didn't matter.
Didn't matter. You're not going to get it.
No, take credit for it, Gil. That's why there was no player for the week for the Eagles because you weren't here on Wednesday.
There we go.
We need you back next Wednesday.
All right, boys.
Mikey, thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Happy New Year.
Same to you. See ya.
Mike Gill, Mr. West Virginia, here with us on Birds 365. All right, McDonald and McMullen coming back. Jeff Nowak is going to join us coming up in about 15 minutes from now. He is the Saints beat guy for WWL.com down in New Orleans. Good job. He was on me before the season, did the Saints preview with me on CBS Sports Radio. So we're going to talk to him. Jeff Nowak joined